Welcome. You're listening to the Renegade River Show, and my name is Mike Hewitt. Today, my guest is State Senator Patrick Kolbach of the 7th District. Senator, welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks, Mike. It's great to be on the show. Thanks for the opportunity.
Yeah, I appreciate you being on. Senator, just to bring you up to speed, last week I had State Representative Shirkey on, and him and I discussed the Medicaid. He calls it expansion. I called it Medicaid explosion. And he was very, very nice. It was a very congenial dialogue, but nevertheless it was a debate. Him and I don't agree. Having said all of that, I wanted to continue with that conversation from the State Senate side, and couldn't think of a better person to get on the air than you.
I appreciate it. Yeah, Mike's a good friend of mine. I went silent right after saying he's a good friend of mine. Okay.
Okay, I wasn't sure whether I'd lost you or not.
I thought I lost you guys when I was saying he's a good friend.
Oh no, I got to tell you, on that note though, I had moderated an event where he came to West Michigan to discuss with some grassroots folks why he was promoting the explosion, and I moderated that event. As you can see, I was a slightly biased moderator, but I tried to do a good job. But I did get to meet him, and I talked there, and then of course I had him on the air. Listen, I think it's like I told him, I think he's a great guy. He's just wrong, at least wrong on this topic. And what I found fascinating is that scanning some of the other positions he's taken in the House, him and I agree on some pretty fundamental core issues, probably 9 out of 10 of them on a percentage. We're just very, very opposite on this one.
He was my buddy and rock out in the House when I was pushing right to work in the Senate. So, you, along with all the grassroots folks, he was critical in helping to get that over the finish line. So.
Yep, absolutely, he's a good guy. Tell me this though, Senator, from the Senate side, where is the Senate, or more specifically, where are you on this Michigan Medicaid expansion?
I'm firmly against the expansion of any government assistance. As a matter of fact, I think we need to start changing the conversation from that of expanding a government program that, in many cases, has failed, to talking about expanding access to quality care for everybody in our state.
Wow, I certainly agree with that. When I look at Medicaid, and you know, of course, if you're looking at taking a program and making it larger, before you do that, to me it seemed logical to say, okay, let's look and see what its track record was. And when I look back over the 48 years since it's been in place, a handful of what I consider to be phenomenons have taken place. The year that it started in 1965, the cost of health care against the average income was 5%. And that 5% had been pretty much a static number for a couple decades. So it wasn't like it started at 0 and went to 5. It had been a pretty firm number that folks could bank on at the time. It's going to be about 5% of my income. If my income is average, that's what health care for my family and I will cost. The year that Medicaid came into being, it began a trend going north, going up, and my numbers go through 2009, and at that point in time it was still climbing, and it was at 30.3%. I understand it's 35% now, and the only time it plateaued was for a 4 or 5 year period during the Clinton administration, frankly, when then Speaker of the House Newt Gingrich and the revolution was going on, and they were dragging things like Medicaid and welfare in general backwards. They were reducing them in scope. And so I say that's the only time that health care expense plateaued in a 48-year period. So when I look at those facts, I got to say, what are we thinking to take this kind of process or this kind of public policy and expand it when we know there's no question what the result of expanding this will be? We have a 48-year history to say this is proof. It's not an opinion anymore.
Yeah, no debate here on that subject. I mean, the key point is a lot of people, a lot of reasons why a lot of people on the conservative side of the fence, or typically on the conservative side of the fence, are looking at expanding is due to the cost shifting problem. And for those of your listeners that aren't aware what cost shifting is, it's when you have there's a federal law that requires that if you go to a hospital that you receive care whether or not you can pay for it or not. And that's a reasonable law, I think. I mean, if somebody's in going to the emergency room and they've got a stab wound or something like that, you want to make sure that they're taken care of. You figure out who pays for it after the fact. So I understand that. But what it does is, if those people do not have insurance, the hospital ends up eating those costs, and in the end, they end up passing those costs on to insurance companies, and the insurance companies end up passing it on to the consumer to the tune of, I think the estimate is around $1,200 a year. So that's what's really driving it. But the strange thing about that, the occurrence is the fact that Medicaid patients end up seeing the ER 3 times the rate of those who are uninsured or those who have private insurance. So, to your point earlier, I mean, we're essentially exploding Medicaid or exploding a problem. We're not containing a problem because the big concern with the hospitals, they're not getting fully compensated for this care. Well, Medicaid only pays 20 to 58 cents on the dollar for their services. So every time you take a Medicaid patient in at a hospital, you're losing money. Well, now we're by expanding Medicaid, we're exploding the number of people that are going to provide those losses to the hospital. It's kind of like I can't remember the exact colloquialism here, but a good friend of mine I was talking to yesterday was saying, you know, if it costs $15 to provide a service, but you only get $10 for it, you know, if you expand the number of folks that are paying $10, you're in a good business. Well, that doesn't work. You're going to go out of money. You're going to run out of money eventually. And yeah,
absolutely.
And against that backdrop, you've got a GDP increase that's about 2 to 3%. So let's think of the long-term implications here for our state. Medicaid has been increasing at the rate of 8% a year. So eventually, you're going to come back and have to pay the piper.
No question about it. I got to tell you, there's a couple other sides to this that I want to kind of touch on. The first is that, and this is unrelated, and I'm not necessarily advocating or promoting. I don't want to get us on a different track, but I do want to point out that there are cities like Pontiac, Michigan, and Flint and Saginaw, several cities where the governor's office, through the executive management provisions, where they've taken over the city management, and what they've done with that is, I'm going to segue back, because you just bear with me for a minute. What they've done is they've got a bunch of retired police officers and firefighters and other public works people that retired with a pension and insurance, and they're saying, you know what, we can't afford your insurance anymore. So now you've got a retired police officer at 60, 58, whatever year old he is or she is, and they're saying, we're going to eliminate your health care. And I have to tell you, Senator, I'm not interested in having the state of Michigan prop up a bunch of city municipal government health care policies. But at the same time, I ask myself, what is the governor thinking in terms of morality to say, we're going to give 470,000 people insurance just because, but we're not going to give the insurance to the folks that we've contracted with, the people that wore targets on their back to defend our community and our property and our life for 20 and 30 years. We're going to hose them. Now, and let me just use Pontiac as an example because I'm very familiar with the inner workings of it. They had the president of the police union at the time, during almost 15 years of negotiations, pushed for and allowed for lower income in terms of what the police officers were making. At the time, they were making in the high 30,000s range, while their peers in other municipalities were making almost double that. And the way the union did it at the time, and by the way, I'm about as far from a union guy as you can get, let me say that to you. But I am a guy that says, when I shake your hand and look you in the eye, I do what I said I'm going to do. Yeah. So these guys, they contracted for lesser annual income in trade for a very nice pension and health insurance.
Right.
Now what they've gotten is an entire lifetime of a lower income than all of their municipal peers, and their health care and pension is being stripped from them. And I'm thinking, you know what? A governor that would oversee that and then push expansion isn't my governor. I don't know how else to say it to you.
Well, I got to tell you, you hit on a very, very fundamental issue and a difference of approach between the current bills that are out there to address Medicaid expansion and the bill that I introduced just yesterday, Senate Bill 459, and there's going to be a companion bill with it here shortly. And there's one mindset that says, let's increase taxes, increase the expenses for everybody in society, and then provide targeted subsidies to friends and family, or to political allies, or wherever you think you're going to get a political bump, you go off and give those guys a shield or an exemption from dealing with the increased expenses. Or you can do as I'm trying to approach, or trying to put in a solution that actually is targeted towards lowering the expenses for everybody. And you talked about a lot of distressed cities. I mean, I've gone off and analyzed what you could do if you actually really got the free market engaged in the process, rather than everything that's going on up in D.C. that we're trying to rubber stamp here in the state of Michigan. If you would actually go off and look at the free market, you would actually find out that for about $2,100 a year, you can provide somebody with unlimited access to a physician, unlimited access to various procedures, access to wholesale prescription drug prices, and then you could also have a high deductible health insurance plan to cover catastrophic incidents. So compare that with we pay roughly about $5,000 for that same population in Medicaid expenses here in the state of Michigan, and you see that there's this huge opportunity to take costs out of the equation right now. So these cities like Pontiac, Saginaw, and Detroit, frankly, they could avoid having to make those tough decisions for retirees here and honor their agreements like they should be doing by providing them access to this quality care, that they actually can take care of these folks without having to worry about all this gamesmanship of some government bureaucrat telling them that you benefit and you don't benefit. I mean, that's just so wrong. I mean, we're supposed to be, our Michigan Constitution says that our Constitution and our state government was instituted for the equal benefit of everybody, and for too often we go off and pick winners and losers. I'm sick and tired of it.
To me, it's an amazing thing. When I look at the current process in terms of, take mental health as an example, and I'm talking on a county level, so county mental health, when they're looking to hire a new mental health specialist, they're looking to see what kinds of qualifications this person has, not to make sure that the person that needs mental health is getting better care, but to make sure that they can maximize their Medicaid billing hours. Right. And I said, wait a minute, we don't care about what kind of care the person's getting as long as we can maximize the billing hours. And the good governor thinks that we should expand that mentality. And I got to tell you, I don't. So you've got a bill that you've tell me about the bill. A little bit more about the bill you're advancing.
Well, there's two bills. One is Senate Bill 459, and actually it's based on work that I actually worked with Mike on about over a year ago.
And did he forget?
No.
I'm sorry.
He's been working. No. I think he still likes all the principles that we nailed down on this. It's just that, let's just say there's other folks he's been working with since that point in time, and they have different opinions. So we've got, But what I propose is Senate Bill 459 is essentially provides the regulatory infrastructure for a free market healthcare marketplace here in the state of Michigan. The bill that's currently in works to accompany that bill is going to request a conversion of our current Medicaid population to a qualified health plan that features direct primary care services and a high deductible health plan. So they'll still get full coverage, full catastrophic. They'll actually get better coverage because it's going to be in a commercially delivered vehicle that actually encourages preventative care and actually has been proven to actually lower costs wherever it's been deployed. So, and by the way, we even get these Medicaid recipients control over what plan they go off and pick as well within that constraint. So we're trying to give them some skin in the game. And the unique thing is, this is you brought up that chart talking about 1965, which is back when I was born, frankly. It was only 5% of our cost. Do you realize what the opportunity is to, right now in Obamacare, they actually limit all of your Medicaid expenses, your out-of-pocket, to 5%.
Right.
And so if we actually got the cost down to the point where it was back to 5% of the income level, we would actually have an opportunity to set it up so that everybody could afford this care.
Now, that's been actually my battle cry against the Medicaid explosion, because First off, I don't know that it'll ever add up to 470,000. It'll probably add up to more than that because I've never seen I've never seen anything that doesn't continue to expand. But the irony to that is, regardless of what number they end up targeting, less will have health care than when we started, because they will continue to drive the cost up, and it will just, a lot of people will literally fall off and pass on getting any kind of health care.
Well, that's exactly what's happening with employers right now. They're dropping them. They're putting them down to part-time status, and then they're dropping their hours when they are in part-time to 29 hours a week, and they drop the coverage. So 400,000, that's a snapshot in time. Right now, they're adding more and more to the roles of people who are going to fit within this Medicaid expansion population, because the employers cannot afford the price of health care. So we need to bring that price down so everybody can afford it.
I think that's absolutely correct. And listen, and the other side of this, that when I see the Medicaid explosion, what I see is it's one of two things. It's either the foundation for Obamacare, unless Obamacare is somehow magically repealed, in which case it will be the replacement for Obamacare.
It's the path to single payer.
Yep, it is single payer. And listen, I'm not a one of those guys where I'm looking for conspiracy, but I do like math, and so I looked at the Soviet Union as an example.
Yeah, I'm an engineer. I like math too.
Yeah, math works for me because it takes away all the rhetoric, and you just look at the facts. And the facts are, as an example, the only other superpower that's, at least in our lifetimes, that existed, they enshrined everything that we're doing now in their Constitution in 1977. That was 14 years before their economy imploded. And the idea that somehow our socialists will do it better than their socialists is mind-boggling to me.
It's supreme arrogance.
It really, truly is. And when I try to get my head around some of this stuff, like Mike Shirkey, who I genuinely like, I can't fathom how they look at the math and think that their way is. They know it. Mike's answer was, he kept saying it's complicated. No, it's really not complicated. And I even joked him. I told him the Thomas Edison story about the measured beacon. Do you remember that story?
No.
Okay. Then, well, you're an engineer. You'll smile about this. Thomas Edison.
All right.
He's asked one of his assistants, I need to know the volume of this glass light bulb. Sometime later, he comes back, and of course, the assistant's got math formulas and calculations all over the table, and he can't figure it out. This is Mike Shirkey. He thinks it's complicated. Thomas Edison walked over and he grabbed the glass bulb and he filled it with water, and then he poured it into a measured beacon. To me, this stuff is not complicated. We have 48 years of history, and we have the Soviet Union, we have France, we have Canada. We've got examples all around us. And normally, socialists love to look at those places and say, look at their example. But somehow not so much this time. They're going to trudge ahead as if there is no historic or contemporary example of the failure of the path that they've got us on.
Yeah. I couldn't agree more.
Yeah, it's fairly frustrating now. Okay, so you've got Senate Bill 459, and we're going to go to a break in just a second. But before we do, just as a reminder, what's the Senate bill on the other bill you mentioned?
We don't have a bill number yet. It's currently being drafted, so I'm calling it Bill number 2 for the time being. Okay, we're gonna go to a break, folks. We will be right back. This is Mike Hewitt, and today our guest is State Senator Patrick Kolbeck of the 7th District in Michigan. Senator, welcome back. Al, it's great to be back, Mike.
Hey, you were talking before we went to break about the other bill that doesn't have a number yet. We've kind of kicked around 459. Tell me a little bit about the one that you've just put forward, unless I've got myself confused.
Well, actually, we talked a little bit about it before. The bill number 2, as I'm referring to it right now, because it's still going under legislative review and the drafting process, is the conversion of the existing Medicaid population to qualified health plan with direct primary care services and high deductible health insurance plan. The Senate Bill 459 is really just the plumbing that enables that type of health plan to work here in the state of Michigan.
Is your feeling that what you're putting forward, obviously I like it a lot, but is your feeling that the will of the Senate would probably be inclined to accept this also, or more than the Medicaid explosion plan?
I think in their hearts they are, but keep in mind, there's a lot of political capital invested in 4714. There's a lot of billboards, there's a lot of robocalls going around the state. There's a lot of people that have invested serious political capital into trying to make House Bill 4714 the bill that goes forward.
Yeah, that's most unfortunate.
We got a long road to haul.
You know, there's a fella named Jack McHugh. I speculate you know him.
Oh, yeah. We've talked about this subject in forums together several times, I believe.
Yeah, for listeners, Jack McHugh is part of the Mackinac Center for Public Policy. He's a fellow I consider a personal friend. I've known him for a few years. I consider him extremely bright. But he recently submitted testimony to one of the Senate committees you may be aware of. And I'll have to paraphrase it because it was the moral of it seemed to be, at least his opening remarks were, that we wouldn't be having this conversation if it were not for a whole bunch of frankly, the medical industry, the hospitals specifically, advancing and putting a lot of pressure out to get this through. In other words, he said, this is not because Obamacare is becoming law. It's not because the Medicaid expansion bill is a good idea, but rather it's because of the lobbying taking place from the hospital industry. Is that your take on it?
I think it's more, frankly, to the fact that there's people that think that federal money is free money. And because the federal government right now for the expansion population is offering 100% of the coverage for this expansion population, where traditionally Michigan contributes 40% towards our current Medicaid population on average. I think they're seeing it as quote-unquote free money, and I think that's the major driver right now. And the sad part is, there's two ways to balance a budget. One is to throw in more revenue into it, which, by the way, is being borrowed. It's not that the federal government has it; they're borrowing to pay for this. Or you can actually lower the costs necessary to cover to get your expenses in line with your revenue. Yeah. And that's the challenge we have in the next few weeks, is to get people to understand that we can go off and create a good, healthy Michigan by lowering the cost side of the equation, not increasing the revenue side.
To me, that just seems so flawlessly logical. If we lower the cost and more people can afford health care, I mean, isn't that what we're actually trying to do?
Yeah, think what it would do for our economy. If we can establish Michigan as a destination state for low-cost, high-quality health care, think about all of our neighbors up to the north in Canada that are dealing with socialized medicine. We may actually drive enough traffic out on the bridge out in Detroit here to justify something like that.
I have an aunt that married a Canadian and moved there in the 50s. And her view of the Canadian healthcare system is that it's a great system if you get the flu or a cold. But if you get something serious, go home to the United States.
Yeah.
I mean, it just, when I look at a fellow like Snyder, I don't agree with him. He's a smart guy. I don't know how he could rationalize what he's doing as the right path. From any angle I look at it, whether it's Jack McHugh's angle or mine or anybody else's, the math just doesn't work. Then the reality is not the picture that they're presenting. And I have to say, listen, these guys are smart enough. They know that that's not what's happening. So when I look at the State House, and I know that some of these folks are your colleagues and probably personal friends, and I'm a Republican, by the way, so I want to. I don't want to be brutal, but listen, when I look at this, and I genuinely believe that if Governor Snyder gets his way and causes Medicaid expansion to be pushed through, that we will be turning the State House and the Senate over to the Democrats as a result.
I agree wholeheartedly. That's what I hear out. We had, within a week, we had 4 congressional district Republican committees make forceful statements and resolutions saying, we don't want anything to do with this, guys. What are you doing? And I don't understand. This is not a fringe movement that's opposed to it. This is core Republican values. Yeah,
listen, when I talk to a lot of people as a result of the show and the politics that I'm in outside of the show, in my little political circle, I joked last week with Mike Shirkey, it's about 5,000 people. And some of them are moderate and we argue over everything. Some of them are very conservative and we argue over everything. I can't find anybody that, whether they consider themselves a Republican or they once in a while vote for a Republican, and everybody in between, other than the folks that have voted for this, I can't find anybody that's a citizen part of the electorate that supports it. Not one person. And I got to tell you, the flip side of that is I chaired the Republican Liberty Caucus of Michigan for a couple terms, and so I know a lot of the folks that are very actively engaged across the state. I hear a lot of people preparing for primaries, and I'm not saying that sensationally, and I'm not using that as a tool to scare people. I'm afraid for our future, and I got to tell you, though, I'll have people push back at me. Some of the folks that are a little bit more conservative or a little bit more libertarian than me, their response to me is why are you afraid about losing the House? We've already lost the House and the Senate. If they push this through, that means that the Democrats are actually in control, or that our Republicans are just like the Democrats, so who cares?
You're right. I tough to disagree with that. I mean, we fought hard. Our supporters fought hard. Everybody who knocked on doors for us fought hard to get us a majority in both the House and the Senate, and also and put a Republican governor up there. And so, if we're going to sit there and turn our backs to them and say, yeah, well, we appreciate it, but now we're going to be doing something besides what we ran on, it's just not giving a good message to the people that have been supporting us.
Oh, you're a mastered understatement. I can tell you from my own piece in this, Senator, I endorsed a number of these folks. I campaigned for a number of them. I did door-to-door for a couple of them. And now I feel like I'm standing on the steps going, "You too, Brutai?"
Oh, yeah.
I really do feel that way. I genuinely feel like these folks that I've supported, at least in the State House at this point, I think they've stabbed us in the back. And I think
that contributes to the low popularity of our elected officials in general. It's because, just like you were talking about with when you shake hands with somebody for the pensions that those retired police officers and firefighters receive, and you shook hands and said that we're gonna provide those benefits for you in exchange for relief on the other side, on the immediate compensation. I mean, you shook hands on it, and when you get elected, I believe that there's that same compact that's established. I leave up everything that I ran on. My platform is still sitting up there at fixingmichigan.com, and I'm sticking to it, and because that's what people elected me to do.
It's like somehow, and listen, to your point about the low ratings, I have genuinely always had a high regard for state government. I really have, literally. I'm not so much for Washington. It seems like when folks get into the vacuum down there, they lose their brain. But the State House specifically, and state government in general, is closest to the people. And I hate to sound like I'm quoting a founding father, but I think they were right. They set up a system that works. Right. And as long as the electorate stays informed, here's the problem. As long as the electorate stays informed and virtuous, we're going to have a good government.
We are a reflection of the people who elect us, unfortunately, and fortunately. So, I mean, this is, and the sad part is right now, the states are the last line of defense against the encroachment of the federal government. We got to stand up. First off, you're absolutely right. But on that point, one of the hopes that many of us had as it relates to Obamacare is that the states themselves would push back. Now, when I look at the Medicaid explosion on a national basis, many of the state governors and their legislative bodies are saying, we're not part of it. But so many of the states, like our own, not only are we not pushing back, but we're climbing on board. And we're rolling over and letting them pat our tummy.
Yeah, now normally us folks over here in West Michigan get maybe a little bit highbrow and we blame it on southeastern Michigan.
Yeah. Hey, I'm from southeast Michigan. I'm fighting like the Dickens to make sure we don't do anything stupid here.
Oh, absolutely. But when I got to tell you on that point, though, when I look at the state representatives here in our area, several of them caved to this. My own state representative, who I like a lot, by the way, I'm not bashing her. I don't know what she's thinking on this particular issue. Amanda Price is who I'm referring to. She's a nice lady.
She's a really nice lady.
She truly is a nice lady. And I look at what and I'm thinking, I'm thinking, Amanda, you must see something I don't, because I can't make the math work. And I hear some of the folks in Facebook and other echo chambers will say that some of these people have a financial motivation. Somebody's on somebody's board. Now, I know that's not Amanda's case. I know her better than that. She's a good person.
Right.
So
they're attacking Mike Shirkey with that too, and it's wrong. I mean,
and that's the first time I heard that was about him. And of course, that's not who I saw when I met him.
Right. No. That's definitely not who he is, and it's definitely not who Amanda is. I know both of them personally. They're good, honorable people. It's just my wife is a very good, honorable lady too. I don't agree with her 100% of the time either, and I know she doesn't agree with me 100%.
Yeah, I've said that a lot of times. I've never met anybody that I've agreed with, entirely, and what a scary world that would be if I did. Tell me something. One of the things that Mike Shirkey said last week was that the Michigan Chamber of Commerce is on board with this.
Yeah.
Is that true?
Yeah, they're with it. The Small Business Association is, and it's all based on this cost shifting problem we brought up earlier. Yeah. And the sad part is there are other solutions to this. We don't have to. They're worried about the fact that right now the hospitals are getting $0 for uncompensated care for the ER because people don't have insurance. So they want to go to Medicaid, which gets them up to anywhere from 20 to 58 cents on the dollar. So they look at that as a way of mitigating the premium increases due to the hospitals jacking up the prices to the people that do have insurance.
Right.
So they see it as a way of lowering the overall prices. Well, there's another way of lowering the overall prices, and it's to adopt a free market system in the state for healthcare delivery, and that's what we're missing right now. And I'm trying to make the case to them, but keep in mind there's been a lot of political capital invested in the House Bill 4714, and I think people are going to be pushing really hard to make sure that they can save face and get something passed on that.
The Michigan Chamber of Commerce endorsed me in 2006 when I ran for office, and I got to know Phil Gajewski fairly well. At the time, he called me a policy wonk, and it makes me smile still because I don't know that I am that. I thought, wait a minute, I thought I was an ideologue. How can I be both?
Yeah.
But what I get a kind of a kick out of it, I own a small business, by the way, and
me too.
Yeah, so when I look at this, I say, I'm not a policy wonk, but again, I can do the math. If I'm thinking I'm pushing my burden from my small business onto the state, it just defies gravity. First off, the state doesn't have a free administration cost, so I know if it's a 50-cent turn is going to cost me $1. I mean, I just know that going in. To me, it's a boomerang. The idea that the Chamber of Commerce and SMBA are throwing this out as a way to displace cost, to me, that's foolishness. It's beyond a mistake. It's foolhardy to believe that is a good thing for their small businesses.
Well, I mean, I'll give them the benefit of the doubt and say this is a solution. The key question is it the best solution? And I would submit no. And that's why the Senate's taking a longer time to look at this. I hope that it's not just to extend the time period, but actually to truly consider alternative solutions that actually can lower costs and address some of the concerns of not just our Republican base, but frankly, I don't know if you heard or saw the rant that Jimmy Hoffa had on Obamacare recently, but I would check into that because they're concerned that the promises that they were made are being broken as well by the administration in D.C.
Imagine liberals lying to liberals. Who would have thunk it?
Yeah, imagine me being on the same side of an issue as Jimmy Hoffa Jr.
I think the motivation is very, very different. You're trying to lower costs, and he's trying to get what he was supposed to have been gotten for free. Okay.
Okay, probably.
But that nobody likes Obamacare is something that us in the Tea Party said would come to pass when such policy is what caused the Tea Party to be in the first place.
Right. I got to tell you, that's what got me involved, and I came in through the Tea Party as well. I've never been in elected office before. I got in on healthcare. My wife's a pediatrician. I've worked with major insurance companies before. I've worked as a consultant. I've worked with major hospital systems as a consultant. I've even worked with pharmaceutical companies. So I've seen this landscape and what's been happening gradually and the push toward this government-run control for a long time. And I got to tell you, I got back and I started saying, heck no. I was one of those strange people that actually read H.R. 3200, which was the first version of Obamacare, and it was 1,017 pages. And when I started reading through that, I got to tell you, I was going, this is not American by any stretch of the imagination. And it started getting me interested more in politics than I had been before. So when this came up, and we've got a chance to make a statement against this abomination called Obamacare here, I'm putting everything I got into making sure that people put in solutions that are true to our principles of the country, not implement this paternalistic bill called Obamacare.
Is Senate leadership trying to sideline you with your kind of thinking?
That remains to be seen.
Okay, because you're thinking way too rational and American for the political environment we're in.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well,
I'm optimistic that we're going to get our day in court, and that when all the cards out on the table, people understand that this is the best solution. It's the one that's true to our principles as Republicans, but it's also true to our principles as Americans. And I think we really need to start getting in the mode of understanding that freedom is something that actually is what our country was based on. It was one of our unalienable rights, and we keep giving it away little by little by little. And in case of Obamacare, by lot.
Yeah, no question about it, Senator. I've got to take us to a break. Hold that thought, and we will be right back. Welcome back. You're listening to the Renegade River Show, and my name is Mike Hewitt. Today we're back with our guest, State Senator Patrick Kolbach of the Michigan 7th District. Senator, welcome back.
Pleasure to talk with you, Mike.
Where'd we leave off, Senator?
We were talking about liberty, and during the break here, I was thinking, one of the parts of Obamacare that really we don't talk about a heck of a lot, but it's that tax enforcement element and the role that the IRS is going to be playing in this. And one of the major reasons why I'm so concerned about the loss of liberty through the implementation of this bill. We all heard about what Lois Lerner did as head of the tax-exempt branch of the IRS, targeting any group with the word patriot in it, and all the conservative groups were on the hit list. And I know good friends that have been very outspoken critics of Obamacare that have been audited like 9 times by now. And now if you start looking at the fact that they're going to have access to more information than ever before on that they could use in all kinds of different nefarious ways, frankly, it gets a little spooky, and we need to put a stop to it. That's another reason why we need to push for free market practices that don't require the government to know more about us than we know about it.
Yep, no question about it. And I got to tell you on that point, I mentioned that I own a store. Renegade River is a store, and we have a federal firearms license, and so it makes me kind of pick up on certain issues. But when you go to the family physician and you're in there saying, I've got an ear infection, and they're saying, do you have firearms in your home? So wait a minute, what does my side-by-side shotgun from 1910 have to do with my ear infection? And the reason I bring that up right now, and it kind of dovetails with the Lois Lerner thing, when we start injecting politics in our tax collection system, it's a really fearsome process. But when we take that same mental paradigm that allows them to do that and then applies it to our health care, I got to tell you, folks, that's a very, very fearsome proposition they're asking us to swallow. Yeah, they got another
parameter to ration our care with.
Well, yeah, but they're going to rationalize it, but they're going to get a lot more into whether you owe $29 this year.
Right.
And it reminds me a little bit, even in Ottawa County, for their, and you probably see it on the other side of the state, but healthcare in Ottawa County, if you're an Ottawa County employee, once a year they herd you into the basement of the courthouse, and they take your temperature, do your BMI, check your sugar. They go through this process, and so it's hard for me as a good capitalist to disagree with it, because on one hand I think, well, wait, if a fellow doesn't take care of himself, why should he? Right. So I can understand the rationale until you're standing in the line, and you feel like you're being herded through like so many cattle. And then I get on the internet and I start looking at what the Soviet Union did, and I thought, uh-oh, I'm seeing a lot of telltale time.
Well, I got to tell you, I got an indicator of that too. My wife and I applied recently, a little while back, a little over a year ago, for a refinance on our mortgage. And part of the application process had a question that said, "Are you a member of a union?" And I'm going, wait a second here. What does that have to do with my ability to go off and pay down my principal on my mortgage? And then I realized, we've got Fannie and Freddie Mac. They're the ones who buy all the paper for all these mortgage accounts. That's a quasi-federal government agency. They're the ones who make up all the rules, and they're passing that out to the free market. I mean, everybody needs to eventually have their paper bought by Fannie and Freddie Mac. So they're making up all these rules to make it more palatable for them to take it in. That's wrong. We are getting in the mode where the government is trying to control the people, and it's always supposed to have been we the people controlling the government.
What people are going to have to start getting used to hearing is various entities or arms of the government, tentacles of the government, telling them you are non-compliant and you'll have to fill out this form and pay that extra amount of money.
Your papers are not in order.
Your papers are not in order. You're non-compliant. Your papers, please. I mean, I have to tell you, I don't know how old you are. I'm 52 years old. I can tell you unequivocally that the America I grew up in does not exist anymore. There has been a fundamental change, and we've got to fight to get it back.
Oh, yeah, and we are, and I'm seeing indicators that we're moving the needle back. I mean, the fact that we've stopped Medicaid expansion for as long as we have right now, so that we've stopped the state-based exchange, we've stopped the state partnership exchange, that we've gone off and fought an increase on taxes for roads when we had plenty of money already in the budget. We just didn't appropriate it to represent that as our priority. There's stuff that's happening right now that's indicating that we're moving the needle. It takes off a lot of effort, and the price of liberty is eternal vigilance, and it's really true.
Tell me something, Senator. Did you say earlier that your wife is a physician?
Yeah, she's a pediatrician. She's no longer practicing because of a lot of the things she's a really good doctor, but because of a lot of things that have been happening in medicine and all the trend lines. I mean, she was just up to 11 o'clock, 12 o'clock at night following up on labs in the office.
Yeah, and I have to tell you, I may have set you up a little bit because I knew the answer to that question, and I wanted to point it out for listeners that's part of what's going to come to pass. We're going to have a lot of good physicians say, "Phooey, I have had enough."
Right, and that's the beautiful part about the solution I'm proposing. It features an expansion of what's called direct primary care services. So essentially, physicians go into cash-only business mode, and they don't have to spend time on coding for their insurance and dealing with government regulations. They don't have to provide information to the government. They get back into the point where you come in, you've got a cough, you go to the doctor, they give you a shot or a prescription, and you move on. And the doctor moves on to the next patient instead of having to code a chart to satisfy ever-changing insurance requirements based on ever-changing government regulations.
Let me ask you, Senator, we've only got a little bit of time left, and I've got a personal quest that I'm on in terms of seeking solutions. So I want to, if I can, take us in a different direction just for the final few minutes.
All right.
And my listeners have heard me beat this drum before, but I'm convinced that we can't save America unless we save inner city America, and I'm equally convinced that we can't save any of it unless we save the American family. And part of that, for me at least, is to fight back against things like Common Core as an educational system. And to me, I guess what is your view of Common Core, if I might ask?
Well, I got to tell you, I started out thinking, hey, as an engineer, I'm thinking it would be great to have a common standard for all the states so we can measure our progress against that of Ohio, Indiana, all that kind of stuff. And but the more I dug into it, Common Core is not just simply a set of standards; it's a whole system. And a lot of the materials, course materials, everything else that went into the development of the standards, frankly, that has this Common Core seal of approval, give me pause as somebody who appreciates the principles upon which our country was founded. I've got some concerns with the standards themselves, and when you have these concerns with the standards, you go into, well, okay, who do I share these concerns with, and how do I get some of these standards changed? And you realize we don't have any governance role at all. This is a private entity, and we have no authority as a state as a state legislature to go off and affect changes to that standard. And just to give you a case in point, usually when you do a standard, I'm an old engineer, and when I put together a good spec, I'd say, here's what I am expecting. If I'm handing this out for a bid to somebody, I don't go off and try to overprescribe how they're supposed to go off and design what they're providing or how they're supposed to implement it. But in Common Core, they've got a standard that's in first grade math that goes beyond saying that I need to demonstrate that I can add 4 plus 4, and it goes into saying that you need to demonstrate that they can do this with multiple methods. And so instead of just having one requirement saying make sure that they add 4 plus 4, you have to demonstrate that they can add 4 plus 4 in 4 different methods. So you're getting into the how, which for me demeans the teaching profession. That's what we send teachers to college for, to get their teaching degrees, is so that they know how to teach their kids and apply the best teaching method to each kid. And every kid is different. So I get a little concerned when I see that at the standards level, but I get really concerned when they start doing things like international benchmarking. And maybe it's not a big deal for math and language arts, but when you get into social studies, things get a little bit spooky here from the United States perspective. How do you go off and compare and contrast different political systems when the purpose of our education system per our Constitution is to develop good citizens? That means they need to know and appreciate how we operate, not how they operate out in Soviet Union.
To me, it's a fascinating thing. I wrote the other day 3 points I want to share with you and the listeners. I wrote Common Core standards, selling more books than your calculator can calculate while preparing our children for globalism. And that's my first point. And I got to pause there. To me, a lot of Common Core is truly about somebody selling a lot of books.
You got it.
That's the capitalism.
Materials.
Oh yeah, that's the capitalist side of this. Somebody has figured out how to get state governments across the United States to pour out billions of dollars to rewrite the same book we had last year with a new cover on it called Common Core.
You got it.
And then on the globalist side, you mentioned the international standards, and I move on from preparing our children for globalism. Common Core standards working overtime to remove citizens from the educational decision making of their own children.
Right.
I have to tell you, listeners and Senator both, I find it, I got to use that word again, fearsome, that we are going to take our school boards, which right now are already bantering about what to do with the school banner money, and we're going to it'll reduce it down to the effect where why have a school board, because the decisions are made way above that. It's just,
I'm a former school board member.
Then you know exactly what I'm saying.
Oh yeah. And
the third of my 3 points is Common Core standards, striving to make my fiction novel America's Final Beginning a sad and unnecessary reality. I have to tell you, the future of America truly is what we're doing with our education and with our family structure. And Common Core seeks, to my view, to eliminate citizens from those foundations. We had a woman on here named Mrs. Konechi, who was born and raised in the Soviet Union, came to America at 34. At the fall of the Soviet Union is when she was able to leave and come to the United States. I tell you that because what she described as her educational foundation is Common Core. And yet we've got Republicans across the United States signing on to it. And I'm going, please stop, pay attention, read what you're signing.
Exactly. The sad part is they signed up for all this, kind of like Speaker Pelosi signed up to Obamacare. You got to pass it before you find out what's in it. Same thing happened with Common Core.
I got to tell you, a lot of them think, well, Mike, I get pushback on this. Mike, having international standards isn't a bad thing. We need to compete. No, competing isn't being equally dumb with the rest of the nations.
Right.
That's not competing. That's not being successful. That's not American exceptionalism. That's just being dumb like everybody else, which is, to me, what this seeks to do. It's the next evolution in dumbing down.
I couldn't agree more. And for those of your listeners who are interested in digging into what the education system in the Soviet Union and how that was part of the political apparatus, I recommend reading the book Lenin's Tomb by David, I think it's Resnick. Wonderful book. And I've been over in the Soviet Union. I was there as part of the space program. I was working on a space station. We were working with the Russians. Got some good friends from Russia. And it's a scary proposition that we're mimicking what they were doing back in the Soviet Union.
Well, I got to tell you, I think Putin is giggling over it. I don't mean just smiling, giggling over it. And I've had people say, Mikey, the Soviet Union doesn't exist anymore. I said, well, you're not watching what they're doing with their Air Force and their naval fleets. If you think they don't exist, you're sadly fooling yourselves. And if you think we won, you're sadly fooling yourselves, because we've adopted all of their ideology. Right.
And there's a book called Towards Soviet America as well that was written back at the turn of the century. That's also illustrative. It was their game plan for how to change America. Right. And they've got a lot of checks in the check boxes there.
Yes, they do. That was a lot of folks have saw the what was it, 45 points that were read into the congressional record in 1963 that illustrated these are what it is they're trying to do. And there's only 2 or 3 check marks left, and yet we think we won. So, tell me this. I think we're about out of time, Senator. Any final points or things that our listeners can do to help you with your effort?
Well, I think the key thing is to make sure people understand that we need to change that conversation from expanding a government program to expanding access to quality care, and you can do that via free market methods. I think we need to paint the vision of what it would mean to lower the healthcare cost burden on all of us. We can get back down close to that 5% level that we had back when I was born that you pointed out at the beginning. The free market works. Let's give it a chance, folks. And maybe to that end, and you segued into education, I think it's really important that we all go back off and learn about our Constitution. Go off and commit some time. It's not a long document, unlike Obamacare. Read the Constitution, read the Declaration of Independence, read about the lives of our signers of the Declaration of Independence, get better equipped to be that good citizen that can be that light on the hill, and fight paternalistic policies that we're starting to see come more and more out of our government.
Senator, do you think most this is such a rhetorical, I don't think you can answer it, but do you think most legislators, either state or federal, have read the U.S. Constitution?
Well, I know they've done it in the federal government because they a while back, I don't know if they do that every year, but they start off the session by reading it.
Wow, okay. I wonder how many of them are chatting with their neighbor while it's being read. I got to tell you, I'm only asking that, again, somewhat rhetorically, but I don't know how they can do the things that they do if they've read it. And it tells me that if they truly have indeed read it, then they're rejecting our U.S. Constitution. And for that matter, we should be out with them. Senator, we've got to wrap it up for the day. But listen, I genuinely appreciate you coming on the Renegade River Show. But more so, I appreciate your effort in our Michigan State Senate.
Hey, thank you very much, Mike. Keep up the good work and get the truth out to folks. We need folks like you to help us, and it really makes a difference. So much appreciated to you and your listeners.
Very, very good. Thank you, Senator Colbeck, and thank you, listeners. We'll be back next week.